all the symbolism, all the imagery, he is borrowing from the Old Testament. And he's pulling it into this revelation, and he's using it, listen, with people who are familiar with the Old Testament. So, when you say to a first century Christian Jew, a Jewish Christian, they know this. When you say to them, there's these seals and these horses, and they're coming down, and it is for what purpose? To kill with sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, a Jew who knows their Old Testament goes, Are you serious? That's coming? Because those are the 4 severe judgments God promises upon Jerusalem.
Today, we're actually going to be talking about end times. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but apparently, we're coming to the end of days again. We got all kinds of people talking about red heifers, solar eclipses, Armageddon, Antichrist. Apparently, this is just the end again. I think even in my short period of time, I want to say people have predicted the end of the world. I can think on my own hand 5-6 times. I guess that's one hand, but even more. I mean, every year it seems like it's something new that is going to be the end of the world. Somebody's reading the book of Revelation or Matthew 24 or Daniel 7, and it's apparently talking about our current times again. And I think it's just classic. Because can you imagine if we would have lived back in like Hitler's day, how they would have been talking about this was the end of the world, persecuting the Jews. So anyways, today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about eschatology or end times. We oftentimes miss this is when you're reading the Bible and you're reading something like Revelation, or you're reading something like Daniel 7, and definitely as you're through the Old Testament, and if you're ever going through the prophets, understand that those are different genres than when you're reading, for example, a narrative, Genesis, or an epistle, Ephesians, Philippians. Different genres, right? You have wisdom literature, then you have songs. You have the Proverbs, wisdom literature. Then you have Psalms, which is going to be more a little bit of wisdom in there, but a lot different because it's music. It's actually music. Poetry, if anything. So you have different genres, and they need to be read within the genre. So if you're reading, an epistle, you can understand you're reading a letter. If you're reading a prophet, then you know that you're listening to a man speaking for God. So it's much different. And there's oftentimes going to be symbolic language there, because often, just keep in mind, if it's prophetic or apocalyptic literature, the reason that you hear symbolic and sometimes really like just incredible style language, hyperbolic style language, you got beasts, and you got, stars falling from the sky, and you have, lake, or not lake of fire, but you have Christ coming on the clouds, and you have mountains being moved, and you have just incredible things that are going on, things that when you listen to it, you're like, I don't understand it. Different 7 lampstands, and you have, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and things like that people start trying to get a view of. Very storytellerish, very, again, it's the type of genre that we'd think of when we're watching The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, or, but it needed to be language that was timeless, the way that sometimes stories may be, but also impactful. Because think back then, they didn't have TV, they didn't have media, they didn't have any of this stuff. They had primarily, verbal tradition. Of course you had some writing, you had tablets and things like that, but scrolls. But for the most part, when people were being spoken to about these things, they needed to have some type of language that was going to be resonating in their mind. There was no books back then. It was all verbal tradition. But just know that those genres make a huge difference, which is why when you listen to charlatans out there trying to convince you that this is going on, and solar eclipses and red heifers, and they're going to, start the apocalypse as soon as they sacrifice these heifers and try to rebuild the temple. Weird shit, right? Weird stuff. You listen to it and you're like, this is just psychobabble bullshit. I mean, you should think that. I think the same thing. There is a logical, rational understanding of the text that we need to take the time to learn and understand. But if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to hear this, and then you're going to actually open the text real briefly and be like, that sounds so crazy. Pretty soon you're going to not believe it yourself if you don't take the time to understand and tie this massive literary event called the Bible together. Written over 1,500 years, over 40 books, over 40 authors, 66 books, all saying the same story. One big overarching narrative that all ties in together. What ends up happening is when somebody questions these really hard aspects of the Bible, number one, even if you don't distrust the Bible, you're going to run from the conversation, and eventually you're going to start kind of somewhat questioning that yourself, because you don't remember, unless you're refreshing yourself with this on a regular basis. You start questioning it again. You're like, wow, this does sound weird. I don't remember why would Christ say that, So you start questioning things and getting all tripped out. So remember, different genres, destruction of the temple in 70 AD, very imperative to understand. That way you can be armed with the information of knowing why we're talking about the end of the age. And the end of the age doesn't mean the end of the world. Different. End of the age, end of the world. Different conversations. And you have to look for that type of language. So we're going to go to the next clip, and then we'll finish up with a few more explanations.
Okay, now this is really important. Watch. John is a Jewish follower of Jesus. This book, listen, is saturated in the Old Testament. All the symbolism, all the imagery, he is borrowing from the Old Testament. And he's pulling it into this revelation, and he's using it, listen, with people who are familiar with the Old Testament. So, when you say to a first century Christian Jew, a Jewish Christian, they know this. When you say to them, there's these seals and these horses, and they're coming down, and it is for what purpose? To kill with sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, a Jew who knows their Old Testament goes, Are you serious? That's coming? Because those are the 4 severe judgments God promises upon Jerusalem. Go to your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 14. Keep a finger in Revelation. John, a Jewish Christian, giving a revelation with Jewish language and biblical language to first century Jewish Christians. He tells them about this scene he sees in heaven with these 4 horsemen. And he tells them something very specific about the judgment. And if you look at Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 21, you'll see what God promised to Jerusalem. He says this, For thus says the Lord God, how much more when I send upon Jerusalem my 4 disastrous acts of judgment, sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast. So when we hear about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, are we supposed to be thinking about Clinton, George Bush, Obama, and Trump? Believe it or not, that's what people do to this book. That's not what the original hearers of this prophecy and revelation would have understood. When they have this imagery and symbolism of this worship scene in heaven, and God gives them an image of these 4 horsemen with these 4 severe judgments, those first century Jewish Christians are going, God's judgment upon Jerusalem is coming. It's coming quickly. He's coming soon. Don't seal up the book. It's about to happen. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are related to the 4 severe judgments upon who? Keep going, Revelation 6. Now here it is. Verse 9. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? How long, O Lord, is the way the prophets used to plead with God to vindicate them and to judge their enemies. How long, O Lord? How long is pleading with God? Will you please act, God? Vindicate us, God. Please come and judge. Protect us. Come and stand for us, God. Now you have the martyrs before the throne of God, and they're saying to God, how long, O Lord, before you avenge our blood? Well, who are these people? Well, they're in John's story here. These are martyrs that have been killed. John's referring to it. So who are the persecutors of these martyrs? They're pleading with God, and here's what they say. Then they say to God, avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth. Then they were given each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So hey, watch. These Christian martyrs are before God's throne, and they're saying, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? By the way, that's an imprecatory prayer. That's a prayer, God, you act for your people, Father. You, Lord, judge our enemies. God, when are you going to judge our enemies and avenge our blood? And I love this. God gives them a white robe, and he says, rest a little longer. Just a little longer. Now you have this question, ask this question, how'd they get there? Who killed them? Who killed them? Well, what's the theme throughout the New Testament in this context? Well, Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who were sent to her. Well, that's what Jesus said to Jerusalem. But in the book of Revelation, the martyrs are specifically martyrs who are experiencing this very Jewish persecution. I'll just give them to you fast. Just get the video later. Revelation 1:9, Revelation 2:9 through 10, Revelation 3:9 through 10, Revelation 6:9 through 11, 11:7 through 8, 11 through 13, 12 verse 10, 13 verse 10, 14, 11 through 13, 16, 5 through 6, 17, 6, 18, 20, and 24, 19, 2, 24, and onwards. The emphasis is on the martyrs. Now, if you ask the question, well, who's doing this persecuting? Well, Jesus has words for the persecuted martyrs here in the book of Revelation. And what he says in the book of Revelation is specifically to Jewish persecution of Christians. To see it, go to Revelation chapter 3. How'd those martyrs get there? Jesus says in Revelation chapter 3, verse 7, and to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I'll make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you because you kept my word about patience, endurance. I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. I'm coming soon. Jesus says here, those who say they're Jews, they're not. They lie. They're a synagogue of Satan. So the emphasis in the book of Revelation is on the martyrs. And what you see throughout the book of Revelation is a specific persecution on the Christian martyrs from, of course, the beast, we would say is Rome, and the Jews who ultimately turned Rome toward the Christians to kill them. And if you learn history, you learn that's precisely what happened.
So, the reason I wanted to play that briefly was just to get you focused on a more comprehensive way to view the end times. So this particular video is going to be kind of short and sweet. I'm going to do another one that after this, a two-parter here. And the second one that we do, I'm going to add a little bit more detail. So it'll be a longer video. And if you're liking what you hear on this particular one, tune into that video to get a more deep dive on eschatology. A brief overview, though. So you have a few different views that people will take. Christians, sometimes they're denominations, but people that are studying theology or trying to deep dive into the Bible, They're reading Revelation, they're reading apocalyptic literature, they're reading Daniel, they're reading some of the prophets possibly. They're going to start planting their flag on 4 different options. You got dispensational, premillennialism, you have premillennialism, then you have amillennialism, and then you have postmillennialism. There's no sense in me trying to go deep dive on everything right now. It's too confusing until you have hours to spend. And you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't need to be confusing. The millennium, this is all you need to know, is a 1,000-year period that is talked about in Revelation 20. And it's not a literal 1,000 years. The apocalyptic literature in Revelation is very symbolic, and it actually has more meaning tied into the Old Testament and prophetic language than it does literal. So again, expansive topic here, but just know that the 1,000 years is not literal, but it's considered the millennium, and all these different views take their position on when Christ is going to come back based on that millennium. So is it premillennium? Is he coming back before that 1,000-year period? Figurative 1,000-year. Post-millennial means he comes back after that 1,000-year period. The amillennial means that the millennium, the 1,000-year period, takes place in heavenly places. So that's just a summary. Anytime, FYI, that you get anybody coming out trying to make a prediction on what is going to be happening, they're going to take world events, they're going to try to tie those into the book of Revelation, Daniel, and Matthew 24, typically. That's going to be either a premillennial or a dispensational premillennial view, or just full-blown heresy, full-blown charlatan mode. So just know that. You have those 4 views. The one that you want to think about, which you just heard Durbin talking about, is post-millennial. Amillennial and post-millennial are going to be the more comprehensive, accurate views. You don't need to plant your flag. Just know that in the end, all 4 views tell the truth, that Christ, when he comes back, he's going to destroy sin, the devil, and idolatry. And he's coming back for his elect. So he wins. He's the conquering king. Christ is king. He is going to come back, and he is going to essentially consummate his wedding with his bride, which is the church, right? There you go with that. Already we're into that apocalyptic symbolic literature. Essentially, all believers of all time are considered the bride of Christ. Now, when he comes back, we're going to be united as one, and the symbolism of that is a wedding. So what I want to talk about and kind of outline for you guys is going to be just real briefly some of the misconceptions around usually dispensational premillennialism, and then I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about postmillennialism, which you heard about with Durbin right there. So let's start briefly with what he's talking about and how that ties in. Few key things you're going to want to know. The destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD, super important. All you need to do is mark that down. Once you understand that that was a landmark event in Christian history, not biblical history, Christian history, in our history, and it has a lot to do with what you're hearing with end of the age, not the end of the world, but the end of the age. So sometimes you're just hearing at the end of the age. And what we're talking about is the end of the Judaic age, which was primarily in your Old Testament. So everything that was done in the Old Testament is considered the Judaic age. And during that time, everything that was written down and carried over was prophesying and foretelling the Messiah, which was Christ. Now, when he came and fulfilled the law and the prophets, he was inaugurating in and opening up the Christian age, or what we would call the Messianic age, the everlasting covenant, the new age, the age that we're in now, the Christian age, the church age, Messianic age. You're going to hear all these same things quite a bit. And what that is the age that is after the cross versus the age that is before the cross. And so when you're looking at and you're hearing end of the age, just know that there was that Judaic age. Now we have the church age, and there was a time where they overlapped. And all that is you were still in that Judaic age when Christ was born and came and did his passion and did his time here, and then did his dying and resurrecting on the cross. Now, after that, he came back. Then you have Pentecost, where he's, being transfigured, and he's talking and commissioning the disciples, and the Holy Spirit is now at work. Now we're talking about entering into that church age. It's a different time, right? But the temple that was still very significant for sacrifices, for worship, it was all pointing towards Christ for all those years prior to him being here. So that temple was still up and running while Christ was here. You guys all know the story of him going in and kicking out the people that were using it as a sales house. And so same temple. So either way around, when he's talking about the end of the age and him coming and riding on the clouds, things like that, this is him kind of using prophetic and very familiar terminology to the Jews at the time. He was tying in what was written in the prophets and in Daniel, letting them know that he's going to come back and destroy that temple. The temple is going to get destroyed by Rome, and it's God allowing it to happen. So sometimes it can get confusing when he's saying, I'm going to do this, God will do this, but it's Rome that destroys the temple in 70 AD. Now what happens is he's coming back on the clouds to essentially take ownership of his kingdom at that point. That old age is passing away. The new age is here. Christ is here, destroying that old age, which was prophesying and leading up to him coming. This was the way that God decided to transfer over from the old age into the new age. We don't need to get into reasons and things like that on this particular video. I just want to give you a summary so that if this is the first time you're hearing this is going to be so much that you're going to kind of be like, wait a minute. I thought that every time I read Revelation, it was, the few times we've read it, I feel like we're on an LSD trip. You're thinking, oh man, this feels like the rapture, Antichrist. And most people, if you're like me, you just kind of shelve it and you think like, I'll get around to that one day when I finally understand the rest of the Bible. And, I don't want to worry about it until days like this come up, right? Where you're hearing of the most odd, random bullshit, like red heifers coming in. It's one passage from the book of Numbers, the law books in the Old Testament, talking about what needs to be done in order to cleanse before they can actually do temple worship, and essentially foreshadowing Christ coming still. The idea that we're tying it back into that for rebuilding the temple again is absolutely, it's complete heresy, and it's complete misunderstanding of anything having to do with the true Messiah who fulfilled the law and the prophets. There's no more temple necessary. That's why we destroyed the temple, because most people, you might be asking, well, why do we have to destroy the temple? Why did this all happen? Well, there was a lot of paganism going on in the temple, just like there is right now. How often do you hear somebody say, I'm a Christian, and they just take the name, but they're absolutely not a Christian. They start talking about people being raptured, which is unbiblical. I hate to break the news. Again, I'm going to expand on this in the next video. It's unbiblical. I'll explain it to you. It's a conversation about what's happening before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Now, when you have people talking like that, or you have people talking about like the Antichrist is going to come and the mark of the beast, two things: either they're just really ignorant or they're full-blown charlatan, and they're just using that because you're going to listen. Because when they're talking about future events, people are always feeling like eager to want to know what's going on. We're always very caught up with mysticism, but we get really caught up in those things. Ouija board, we watch scary movies. The moment we talk about the end time, we're thinking, oh my gosh, Armageddon, are we going to see the stars fall? We're prone to the conspiracy theory mysticism. We're all prone to it. I am too. I start listening to it, and as many times as I've listened and read back on these things, and got the comprehensive answer, you still listen to it again and you're like, wait a minute, did I miss something? But here's why, we want to talk about this, and why I make the video on this particular subject, and, why I want you guys to tune into the next one, is because as time goes by and as our world advances and we get technology that is increasingly good and bad, but in a way, it's good in a way that it allows us to have knowledge at our fingertips. And we're also learning so much more about this world that God created through science, technology, physics, quantum physics. These things are just incredible things to be able to have at our fingertips and to be able to learn and know and to be able to observe what God has created. We're learning more and more new things as time goes by, and more things are being revealed that help us have clarity on ignorant traditions that were put in, like, for example, Darwinian evolution. Big joke. Of course, there's aspects of it that make sense, but when people start treating it like a religion, like, oh, I would never believe in, any of these religious people. I mean, we have evolution now. If you're not going to believe in evolution, then you just don't even have a brain. Except for if you look into any of that, most of it, at least 50%, has been debunked now. As things advance and people have so much information and knowledge at their fingertips, what winds up happening is people just become absolutely numbed out to things like apocalyptic and prophetic language. We have an amazing amount of entertainment today too. So when you hear apocalyptic or prophetic language, right, you're immediately thinking, this is all I ever hear or see that is like that is a movie or a book, and it's fictional. I can't trust this fictional story time with my faith in my soul, my eternal soul. I need something concrete. I need science-backed evidence to tell me where I'm going when I die. I know we don't say that, but that's what everybody wants. Because we have so much advancement, we just automatically feel like there better be a concrete fucking answer to that. Otherwise, I don't believe it, right? And it's unfounded. It's ridiculous to think that way. We've talked about this before. None of these things are ever concrete. Time, your consciousness, gravity, we don't have explanations for these things. Another one, why does everything decay? I know we can observe it, but why did it have to be that way? You see what I mean? There's really no major explanation 100% on that. Can we reverse the aging process? Why does a tree die off? Why does, there's an observation on it, and we can explain how it's happening. But the idea of why it is happening, we can't give you an answer to, because we can't explain time. So there's so many things that are absolutely fundamental that you're never going to get a concrete answer on. And when you start hearing apocalyptic and prophetic language, we have to fall back on that, and we have to be able to know our Bibles enough, know the history enough, and think of this logically. Go back to your presuppositions. Go back to the idea of revelational epistemology, revealed knowledge, where this is where we get our knowledge. This is where we get our proven standards from, the character of God, right? And if you can go back to that, and if you can ground your mind there, you can have a rational response to these people that are coming after you and saying things that are completely on a sand-like foundation. If they are questioning your beliefs and they're acting as if they have the evidence, this is how it is. They don't have that. They're just speaking with authority. And when you start looking into what they're telling you, if it's talking about spiritual things, okay, I'm not anti-science, I'm all about it. But I'm saying, if somebody is coming after you and saying, this book of Revelation is a joke, this type of literature, this is an embarrassment. The fact that you can even listen to that and think that, and I can't get behind any of that. People coming back from the dead, all this nonsense, right? Understand that their whole existence is based on what we would call miracles. Your mind, your consciousness, time, all of it is a miracle. Okay, you don't understand it, you're never going to be able to understand your consciousness or time. I don't care what type of advancement we get to monitor it and look at it. You're not going to know where it came from. Nobody's ever going to get it. It's impossible, right? With their theories. So they're always hinged upon something unknown. And it's important to ground yourself in that idea that they don't have an answer to everything, even though they will speak to you that way. So knowing that they're coming from also a fictional, like unknown miracle spiritual world that they can't explain, they're coming from there whether they like it or not. You're definitely coming from that. And you may not be questioning that, but when they question you, you have to bring them back to that. You have to say, hold on a minute. First off, everything that you base all of your knowledge on is absolutely in question. You don't have anything concrete at the basis of your presuppositions. You feel concrete from about halfway up. You think it's all tight up here, but down here, there's nothing concrete. You don't really have any answers for all those things. So slow down for a minute. And then you can tell them, let me explain to you difference in genres. You're reading Revelation. That's apocalyptic literature. That's timeless literature that is full of symbolism and is tying Old Testament prophets into what Christ has done and what to look forward to. You must understand this. Otherwise, you're going to be reading it so backwards, it's not even funny. And you also got to tell them, you have any idea on the destruction of the temple in 70 AD? They're going to be like, I don't, I think that. Exactly. You don't know what you're talking about. So until you know what you're talking about, just don't come with this contempt against us. Let us explain ourselves to you. And if you're in this position, you can explain yourself to them and say, hold on a minute. I'll tell you why it's complete ridiculousness that you're looking at solar eclipses and red heifers, and then you read it over here and you think our, faith is some type of story time Harry Potter land. You just don't understand it. Slow down a minute, okay, and let me explain that to you. I'll take you to the verse. The red heifers in Numbers. The solar eclipses they're talking about, they're not talking about any solar eclipses, but the darkness of the sun and stars falling from the sky was God talking about destroying a nation in the Old Testament. And he's giving, through a prophet, some really extreme language to get people paying attention. You see what I mean? And then in New Testament, you start hearing about that to tie in what's going to happen to the temple being destroyed in 70 AD, which is what Christ prophesied. He's not talking about the end of the world, okay? He's talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And he's explaining to those Jews at the time that had the Jewish literature about what had happened to the nations in the past. He's saying, just like that happened, this is going to happen. That's why he's using the same language. So again, we'll go through some of the verses on the next video, but understand that's how to explain this. Don't get caught up in all these weird Antichrist nonsense and everything that people will just start throwing so much craziness at you that you just tune out, And so this is just a bit of encouragement for you. And also stick in there. Remember the theme of our channel, which is revelational epistemology, using that as our foundation of knowledge, right? God's revealed word, and understanding that his character is the standard that we judge all of our ethics and morals upon. And once you have, once you have that strength and understanding and foundation, now you can put that purpose and that pursuit together. And now you have a vision for whatever it is that God has put in your life as a part of his will, whatever you're focused upon. You can feel confident and know you don't have to walk around and think that you're in this camp of people that are sacrificing red heifers. You're not. Don't group yourself with those people, and don't feel ashamed when you see that stuff. Arm yourself with the knowledge, and you can come and you can absolutely shut down those conversations. And that's what my goal is into bringing all this knowledge and information your way. So have a good one. We'll see you on the next video.